My name is Elena Voss. And if you're watching this right now, I want you to know something important. I wasn't supposed to be here telling you this story. According to everyone who once loved me, I died 6 months ago on a rainy mountain trail. They buried an empty casket. They cried real tears at my memorial. And then they moved on with my money and my life. But here I am. Hello, everyone. Thank you for sitting with me today. Wherever you are, maybe sipping coffee in a quiet kitchen or lying in bed after a long day, I hope you feel safe enough to hear what I'm about to share. If you've ever been erased by the people who were supposed to protect you, type the word "seen" in the comments. I read every single one. You are not alone. It was the kind of cold, crisp October morning in Asheville that makes you grateful to be alive. I remember standing in our sunlit kitchen, barefoot on the warm hardwood floors, while Marcus wrapped his arms around me from behind. His chin rested on my shoulder as I stirred my coffee. "You still going up to Raven's Ridge today?" he asked, his voice soft and casual. "Yeah," I smiled. "The leaves should be at their peak after yesterday's rain." He kissed the side of my head. "Be careful up there, okay? That trail gets slick." I should have noticed the slight edge in his tone. But I didn't. I was too busy loving him. 3 hours later, I was gone. The fall itself is still a blur of green, brown, and terror. One wrong step near the overlook. The world tilting, the sickening rush of air, branches cracking like gunshots as I tumbled. Then the freezing shock of the river swallowing me whole. I don't know how long I was in the water. Days, maybe. The next thing I remember is the smell of wood smoke and beef stew. A gentle hand on my forehead. A raspy, kind voice saying, "Easy now, honey. You're safe." Her name was Ruth. A retired nurse living deep off-grid in a small cabin nestled among the pines. Her dog had found me half dead on the rocky riverbank. She brought me back when no one else was looking. No hospital, no ID, no records, just her quiet patience and homemade remedies for weeks. I drifted in and out of consciousness while my body slowly healed. Broken collarbone. Concussion. Bruises that covered me like dark maps of survival. Every time I woke up, Ruth would be there, wiping my face with a cool cloth, feeding me spoonfuls of broth, telling me stories about her late husband to keep me grounded. My memories returned in fragile pieces. First my name, then our house with the wide front porch, then Marcus's laugh, then Claire, my little sister who I had practically raised after our father left. When I was finally strong enough to sit up for more than an hour, Ruth brought out her old laptop. The internet connection was painfully slow, but it worked. My hands trembled as I typed my own name into the search bar. The first result hit me like a physical blow. Local photographer Elena Voss presumed dead after tragic hiking accident. They had held a memorial service. My mother had spoken. Friends left flowers at the trailhead. And there, in a beautifully written article, posted just weeks earlier, was a photo that shattered everything I thought I knew. Marcus, smiling. His arm wrapped protectively around Claire, her hand resting on his chest, a diamond ring catching the light. The caption read, "In the darkest season, we found each other. Grateful for new beginnings." They were engaged. Using the life insurance money that had already been paid out. The ceramic mug of herbal tea slipped from my fingers and shattered on the wooden floor. The sound echoed through the small cabin like a gunshot. Ruth rushed in, but I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the screen with a trembling hand. She read it in silence. Then she exhaled slowly and whispered, "Lord have mercy." In that moment, something inside me broke and something else was born. The trusting, peacekeeping Elena I used to be died for real on that mountain. The woman who looked up at Ruth with cold, clear eyes was someone entirely new. And she had just decided, She was going to walk back into their perfect little world. Not screaming, not raging, but perfectly, dangerously calm. Before that mountain took me, my life looked like the kind of story people envy. Marcus and I had been married for 8 years. We met at a local art festival where I was exhibiting my photographs. He was the charming corporate consultant who kept coming back to my booth, not to buy prints, but to talk to me. His smile was easy. His attention felt like sunlight. Within 2 years, we were married in a small ceremony surrounded by wildflowers and close friends. We bought a beautiful craftsman-style home on the edge of Asheville, with a wide front porch where we'd sit for hours watching fireflies in the summer. The kitchen was my favorite place, warm wood cabinets, big windows, and always the smell of fresh coffee or something baking. Marcus loved to cook on weekends. Claire would drop by unannounced, still in her yoga clothes, and the three of us would laugh until our sides hurt. I thought we were solid. The kind of couple other people pointed to and said, "That's what I want." I was a photographer who specialized in capturing raw, emotional moments, maternity shoots, intimate weddings, family sessions that went beyond posed smiles. My work was starting to get recognized. We talked about starting a family soon. Marcus said he wanted a little girl who looked like me. I believed him. Looking back now with clearer eyes, the cracks were there if I had only paid attention. Marcus had become more distant in the last year. He worked late more often. Our savings account balance seemed to fluctuate strangely, but he always had an explanation. New clients, investment opportunities. Trust me, babe. Claire had also been coming around more frequently, sometimes staying for dinner even when I wasn't home. She'd text Marcus directly to coordinate. I told myself it was sweet. My husband and sister getting along so well. The morning of the hike, Marcus was unusually attentive. He made my coffee exactly the way I liked it, added a kiss on my forehead, and suggested Raven's Ridge Trail specifically. The views after rain are supposed to be incredible, he said with that warm smile I had fallen in love with. I kissed him goodbye, grabbed my camera bag, and drove up the mountain feeling grateful. Grateful for the man I had. Grateful for the sister who felt more like a best friend. Grateful for the beautiful, predictable life we had built together. How naive I was. The trail was quiet that morning, the air sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Golden and crimson leaves carpeted the path. I stopped several times to take photos, breathing in the peace I always found in nature. Near the scenic overlook, the path narrowed beside a steep drop. The rain from the day before had left patches of reddish mud that looked deceptively stable. I took one careful step, and the ground simply gave way. There was a terrifying moment of weightlessness, then impact after impact as I tumbled down the ravine. Sharp pain exploded in my shoulder. Cold water rushed over me. The last thing I remember before darkness swallowed everything was thinking, "Marcus, Claire, I'm sorry." When I woke up in Ruth's cabin days later, I had no idea that in the world I left behind, they had already begun rewriting my story without me. They had reported me missing. They had organized search parties. And then, when hope faded, they held a beautiful memorial where Marcus delivers a tearful eulogy about how I was the love of his life. Claire stood beside him the whole time, holding his hand. My mother later told everyone how proud she was of how strong they were being for each other in their grief. They didn't waste much time. While I was fighting to stay alive in a stranger's cabin with no phone and no way to tell anyone I was still breathing, they were already planning their future, using the generous life insurance payout that had cleared surprisingly fast. Ruth told me later that when she first saw me on that riverbank, she thought I was already gone. But something, maybe stubbornness, maybe the universe, refused to let me die that easily. I spent weeks in that cabin, slowly putting the pieces of myself back together. Every small victory, sitting up without dizziness, walking across the room without falling, felt like a quiet rebellion against the fate they had chosen for me. But the real strength didn't come from healing my body. It came the moment I saw that engagement photo. That was the moment the old Elena died completely. And the new one, quieter, wiser, and far more dangerous, opened her eyes. The trail that morning was more beautiful than I had imagined. Sunlight filtered through the canopy of turning leaves, creating a golden cathedral effect that made me stop every few minutes to capture it with my camera. The air smelled clean and alive. Pine, wet earth, and that crisp autumn bite that always made me feel grateful to be alive. I was careful. I really was. But after weeks of rain, the red clay soil had turned treacherous in places. Near the scenic overlook, the path narrowed dangerously beside a steep drop-off. One moment I was admiring the valley view, the next my right foot simply slid out from under me. There was no dramatic scream, just a sickening lurch of my stomach as the world tilted violently. I tried to grab a branch, but it snapped in my hand. Then came the terrible tumbling, rocks, branches, and pain. A sharp crack in my left shoulder. The world spinning in green and brown blurs. And finally, the freezing shock as I hit the rushing river below. The cold water stole my breath instantly. I fought, but the current was too strong. Darkness pulled me under. My last conscious thought was a strange, calm acceptance. This is how it ends. I don't know how many days passed in that river. The doctors later said it was a miracle I survived the hypothermia and head trauma. What I do remember is waking up to the crackling of a wood stove and the rich smell of beef stew. A weathered but kind face leaned over me. Deep wrinkles around gentle blue eyes. "Well, look who decided to join the living," the woman said softly, her voice raspy but warm. "Name's Ruth. You're safe now, child. Don't try to move too fast." She told me later that her old hunting dog, Bear, had dragged her to the riverbank where I had washed up like a broken doll. Most people would have called emergency services. Ruth didn't. She lived completely off-grid for a reason. Deep distrust of the system after losing her husband to medical complications years earlier. She brought me back to her small rustic cabin hidden deep in the national forest and used every bit of her nursing knowledge to keep me alive. The first 2 weeks were hell. Fever. Pain so deep it made me cry silently at night. Confusion so thick I couldn't remember my own name some days. Ruth never left my side. She fed me spoonfuls of broth, changed my bandages, sang old hymns when the pain was unbearable. She spoke to me constantly, even when I couldn't respond, grounding me with stories about her life, her garden, her late husband's terrible jokes. Slowly, my body began to heal. The bruises faded from deep purple to sickly yellow. I could sit up, then stand, then walk short distances across the cabin floor without collapsing. But my mind was still fractured. Memories came in painful fragments. Marcus's laugh, our wedding rings, Claire helping me pick out my wedding dress, Sunday brunches on the porch. One afternoon, while Ruth was outside tending her garden, I managed to make it to the small wooden table where her old laptop sat. The connection was slow and unreliable, but it worked. With trembling fingers, I typed my name. What I found destroyed me in ways the mountain never could. Not just the news articles declaring me dead. Not just the photos from my memorial service with my mother crying and Marcus looking devastated. It was the newer posts. Marcus and Claire smiling together at what looked like an engagement party. Her hand on his chest. His arm around her waist. The life insurance payout already transferred. Plans for a future I was never meant to see. I sat there in the dim cabin light, staring at the screen until my vision blurred with tears. The mug of tea Ruth had made me slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the floorboards, just like my entire understanding of love and family. Ruth found me there. She didn't say much at first. She simply cleaned up the broken pieces, made me a fresh cup of tea, and sat with me in silence while I cried the kind of tears that feel like they're coming from your soul. That was the moment everything changed. The gentle, trusting photographer who believed the best in people died that afternoon in Ruth's cabin. In her place rose someone quieter. Someone who understood that sometimes the people who say, "I love you," the loudest are the ones who will bury you the fastest. And that someone had just decided she was going home. Not to forgive. Not to forget. But to make sure the people who tried to erase her understood exactly what they had done. The days that followed my discovery were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. Not because of physical pain, that was already fading, but because of the emotional weight that threatened to crush me completely. Ruth gave me space, but she also gave me something more valuable: quiet strength. She never pushed me to talk before I was ready. Instead, she kept the wood stove going, made sure I ate, and occasionally reminded me that surviving the mountain was already a victory most people would never understand. But I needed answers. One gray afternoon, while rain pattered softly on the cabin roof, I sat down at the old laptop again. This time I didn't stop at the headlines. I read everything. The local news articles about the search efforts that were eventually called off. The touching eulogy Marcus gave at my memorial, where he spoke about how I was the light of his life. The photos of Claire standing beside him, looking appropriately grief-stricken in a black dress. And then the more recent posts. Just 4 months after my death, they were already engaged. The life insurance money, nearly $800,000 after everything, had cleared remarkably fast. They used part of it to pay off Marcus's secret gambling debts that I never knew existed. Another portion went toward a down payment on a bigger house, and they were planning an extravagant wedding for the following spring. My wedding dress, the vintage one I had dreamed about since I was a little girl, passed down from my grandmother, was now being altered for Claire. I felt physically sick. The betrayal wasn't just romantic, it was calculated, systematic. They had been planning this for a long time. Text messages I later discovered showed they had been involved for over 14 months before my accident. While I was planning our anniversary trip to Italy, they were meeting in secret. While I was trying to get pregnant, they were already building a future without me. I sat there for hours, reading every comment, every condolence post, every updated photo. People praising how strong Marcus and Claire were for finding comfort in each other. My own mother commenting heart emojis under their posts, saying, "God works in mysterious ways." The mug incident wasn't the only thing that shattered that day. Something inside my chest physically hurt. A deep, hollow ache that made it hard to breathe. I cried until there were no tears left. Then I just sat there, staring at the wooden wall, feeling completely empty. Ruth eventually came in and found me. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She simply pulled up a chair, took my cold hands in hers, and said, "They didn't just steal your money, honey. They tried to steal your entire life. The question now is, what are you going to do about it?" That question became my lifeline. I didn't want to run back screaming and crying. That would have been too easy for them. They would have painted me as unstable, traumatized, confused. No. I wanted them to feel what I felt. The slow, crushing realization that everything they built was on lies. So I made a decision that changed everything. I wasn't going back as the broken wife they buried. I was going back as someone they would never see coming. Over the next several days, with Ruth's help, I began to plan. I used her grandson's old truck to go into the nearest town. I bought a cheap burner phone, simple clothes that made me look forgettable, and a pair of non-prescription glasses that changed my appearance just enough. I dyed my hair a darker shade in Ruth's kitchen sink. I reached out to Sophia, my best friend since college, the only person I trusted completely. When I called her, she thought it was a cruel prank at first. Then she heard my voice and broke down sobbing. She became my eyes and ears in the outside world. Through her, I learned even darker details. Marcus had been deep in gambling debt for years. Claire had helped him forge documents to accelerate the insurance claim. My own mother had quietly supported their relationship because she believed the family needed stability and because Claire had always been her favorite. The betrayal ran so deep it made me question everything I thought I knew about love and family. But instead of letting the anger consume me, I channeled it. I started making careful lists, passwords I remembered, financial accounts, old emails, friends who might still be loyal. I documented everything. Ruth watched me work late into the nights at her kitchen table, her eyes filled with quiet concern. One evening, she placed a fresh cup of tea beside me and said softly, "Revenge is a heavy thing to carry, Elena. Make sure it doesn't become heavier than the justice you deserve." I looked up at her and replied with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "I'm not carrying revenge, Ruth. I'm carrying truth. And truth has a way of finding its own weight." That became my mantra during those long, silent weeks of preparation. I wasn't in a hurry. I let them plan their perfect wedding, send out expensive invitations, choose flowers, taste cakes, paid for with my death benefit. All while I moved quietly in the shadows, gathering the pieces I would need to dismantle their carefully constructed lie. The old Elena, the one who forgave easily and kept the peace at all costs, was truly gone. In her place was a woman who had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is survive and then return. The decision to move carefully and silently was one of the most important choices I made. I could have stormed back into town immediately, screaming the truth from the rooftops. But I knew how that would end. They would call me delusional, traumatized, mentally unstable after the accident. The insurance company might even question the payout. No. I needed proof. I needed strategy. And most importantly, I needed time to become someone they wouldn't recognize. Ruth's cabin became my war room. During the day, I focused on healing, walking longer distances, strengthening my shoulder, letting the mountain air clear my mind. At night, under the soft glow of an oil lamp, I worked. Sophia became my lifeline on the outside. She fed me information carefully, never raising suspicion. Through her, I learned the full extent of what they had done. Marcus's gambling debts were worse than I imagined. Nearly $200,000. He had been skimming from our joint accounts for over a year. Claire had helped him create false documents claiming I wanted the insurance policy changed. They moved fast after the accident. Almost too fast. I changed my appearance gradually. Darker hair. Simple, forgettable clothes. The kind of glasses that softened my features. I practiced speaking in a slightly lower, calmer tone. I became someone you might pass on the street without a second glance. One evening, Sophia risked everything to meet me at a quiet rest stop 2 towns away. When she saw me step out of the old truck, she broke down in tears and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. "Everyone thought you were gone." We sat in her car for hours. I showed her the evidence I had gathered so far. She listened with growing horror, then quietly said, "Tell me what you need me to do." From that moment, I was no longer alone. I reached out to an old contact, a private investigator I had worked with years ago on a sensitive photography project. He owed me a favor. For a discreet cash payment arranged through Sophia, he began digging into Marcus's financial trails and Claire's communications. The evidence started piling up. Bank transfers, deleted text messages recovered from cloud backups. Even a disturbing conversation where Marcus joked about how the hiking accident was convenient timing. Every new piece of information hurt. But every piece also strengthened my resolve. I spent hours practicing what I would say when the time came. Not angry outbursts, not emotional accusations. Calm, clear, devastating truth. I recorded myself speaking in Ruth's cabin, adjusting my tone until it sounded exactly right. The voice of a woman who had been to hell and returned quieter, stronger, and completely in control. Ruth watched all of this with quiet wisdom. One night, as I was reviewing documents, she placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "You're becoming someone new, Elena. Just make sure you don't lose the parts of yourself worth keeping." Her words stayed with me. I wasn't becoming cold. I was becoming clear. I began making lists of every person who would be at the wedding, every vendor, every detail Sophia could gather. I wanted to know the exact moment I would step into their perfect day. There were moments of doubt, of course. Late at night when the cabin was quiet and the weight of everything pressed down on me, I would wonder if it was worth it, if I should just disappear and start over somewhere new. But then I would remember the engagement photos. The way they smiled while standing on my grave. The way they used my death as the foundation for their new life. And the doubt would fade, replaced by something colder and more focused. I wasn't doing this only for revenge. I was doing it for the version of myself they tried to erase, for every woman who has ever been quietly replaced, betrayed, and written out of her own story. By the time the wedding date grew closer, I had everything I needed. Evidence, allies, timing. And most importantly, peace with the woman I had become. The mountain didn't kill me. It forged me. The deeper I dug, the more the betrayal revealed itself in layers I never could have imagined. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just money. It was a carefully constructed plan that had been in motion long before that fateful hike. Through the private investigator and Sophia's careful reconnaissance, the full picture emerged. Marcus had been drowning in gambling debts for nearly 2 years. Online casinos, private poker games, shady investments. He had hidden it all behind smooth explanations and fabricated business trips. When the debts became impossible to manage, he saw only one way out. Me. Claire had been involved for 14 months. Their relationship began as comfort. During a time Marcus claimed I was emotionally distant because of work. It evolved into something calculated. Claire, who had always struggled with money and validation, saw an opportunity. Together they began planning how to remove me from the picture permanently. The hiking trail suggestion wasn't random. Marcus had researched the dangers after heavy rain. He knew the risks. He encouraged me to go alone that day with a smile. The insurance policy had been quietly updated months earlier with forged documents that Claire helped prepare. My signature was faked with professional precision. When I died, the payout cleared in record time because they had prepared every detail. But the cruelest layer came from my own mother. She had known something was wrong between Marcus and Claire. Instead of warning me, she chose silence. After my disappearance, she actively supported their relationship, telling friends it was beautiful how they found each other in grief. She even helped Claire alter my grandmother's vintage wedding dress, the one that was supposed to be mine one day. When Sophia managed to get me a copy of their text messages, I read them in Ruth's cabin with shaking hands. One exchange particularly stayed with me. Marcus, the trail should be dangerous after the rain. Make sure she goes alone. Claire, this is the only way we can be together without judgment. I love you. They didn't just betray me. They tried to erase me. The final twist came when I learned Claire was already 3 months pregnant at the time of my death. The baby they were planning to raise with my money. The future they were building on my grave. I sat with that information for a long time, not crying, not screaming, just breathing through the pain until it transformed into something sharper, clarity. I knew I had to confront my mother. We met in secret at my childhood home one rainy evening. I let myself in using the hidden key we'd kept under the loose brick for 20 years. When she turned on the kitchen light and saw me standing there, alive, she dropped her purse and nearly fainted. "Alina," she whispered, clutching her chest. I didn't rush. I placed 2 documents on the kitchen table, the original trust from my grandmother and the forged version she had helped create, that favored Claire. Her face went pale. I gave her a choice that night. Help me expose the truth, or face legal consequences alongside them. She cried. She made excuses. She said she thought it was God's plan. But in the end, her survival instinct won. She agreed to feed me information about the wedding plans. Every vendor contract, every detail of the schedule, the seating chart, the speeches. I left her house that night feeling neither triumph nor pity. Just a quiet understanding that some bonds, once broken, can never be fully repaired. Back at the cabin, Ruth listened as I told her everything. When I finished, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "You're carrying a heavy load, child. But you're carrying it with grace." I smiled for the first time in weeks. I'm not carrying it alone anymore. The final weeks of preparation were methodical. I reviewed every piece of evidence, practiced my words, coordinated with the private investigator and a discreet contact in law enforcement who Sophia trusted. Everything was timed perfectly. I wasn't rushing toward revenge. I was walking toward justice with steady, deliberate steps. And with every step, I became more certain. The woman they tried to bury was returning. Not as a victim, but as the author of her own ending. The final weeks before the wedding became a masterclass in patience and precision. I no longer felt the raw, burning anger that had consumed me in the beginning. Instead, I felt something calmer and more powerful. Focused determination. Every morning I woke up in Ruth's cabin, I reminded myself why I was doing this, not just for payback, but for the version of Elena who deserved to be seen, heard, and respected. Sophia continued feeding me critical details. The wedding was scheduled for the last Saturday in April at the historic Trinity Church in downtown Asheville. The same church where Marcus and I had attended Christmas services for years. The reception would be at the exclusive Magnolia Estate. Everything paid for with my life insurance money. My mother, now reluctantly cooperating, sent me the full guest list, vendor contracts, and even photos of the seating chart. Claire wanted a dramatic entrance. Marcus had hired a live string quartet. They had written personalized vows about finding light after darkness. The irony was almost poetic. I spent hours studying every detail. I knew exactly where the photographers would be positioned. I knew the order of events. I knew the moment the priest would ask if anyone had objections. That was the moment I had chosen. Meanwhile, the private investigator delivered the final pieces of the puzzle. Recovered text messages, bank records showing large transfers, even a disturbing voice memo where Marcus and Claire discussed how convenient my love for hiking had been. I saved everything on multiple encrypted drives. I practiced my entrance and words repeatedly in the quiet of the cabin. Not dramatic, not hysterical, just calm, clear, and devastating. I wanted them to feel the weight of every lie they had told. Ruth watched my preparations with a mixture of pride and concern. One evening, as I was reviewing the final evidence folder, she sat across from me with 2 cups of herbal tea. "You've become someone formidable, Elena," she said quietly. "Just remember that strength isn't only in what you destroy, it's also in what you choose to rebuild afterward." Her words stayed with me. I wasn't planning to destroy them completely. I wanted them to face the consequences of their choices in front of everyone who had mourned me. I wanted the truth to finally breathe. The night before the wedding, I stayed in a small motel on the edge of town under a different name. Sophia brought me the final package, the original grandmother's wedding dress that had been switched with the altered one Claire planned to wear. I ran my fingers over the delicate lace and felt a strange sense of peace. I slept surprisingly well that night. No nightmares, no racing thoughts, just deep, restorative sleep. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Simple but elegant black dress. Hair pulled back. Minimal makeup. I looked like a refined guest. Until you looked closer and recognized the woman they had buried. Sophia picked me up and drove me to the church. As we sat in the car across the street watching guests arrive, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. I looked at the beautiful church decorated with white roses and took a deep breath. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We reviewed the plan one final time. Law enforcement contacts were in position. Evidence was ready to be displayed on the large screen meant for wedding photos. Everything was perfectly timed. As the church bells began to ring, signaling the start of the ceremony, I stepped out of the car. My heart was steady. My hands were calm. The woman they thought they had erased was about to walk down the aisle. Not as a bride, but as the reckoning they never saw coming. The wedding rehearsal took place the evening before the main ceremony. Sophia and I slipped into the church through a side entrance, using information my mother had reluctantly provided. We made our way up to the choir loft, hidden behind heavy velvet curtains and shadows, where we could observe everything without being seen. Below us, the scene unfolding was almost surreal. The church was beautifully decorated with white roses and soft greenery. The string quartet practiced softly in the corner. Claire walked down the aisle in a sundress that was already showing the early curve of her pregnancy. Marcus stood at the altar, smiling at her with the same adoring expression he used to give me. My mother fluttered around like a nervous coordinator, giving instructions about timing and photo angles. It was a grotesque parody of the life I once had. "They look nervous," Sophia whispered, handing me a small pair of binoculars. "Good," I replied softly. "They should be." I watched Claire practice her walk multiple times. She kept touching her stomach protectively. At one point, she had a whispered argument with my mother near the third pew. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught fragments. "It doesn't feel right wearing her dress." My mother hissed something back about everything being perfect. Marcus joined them, putting his arm around Claire and murmuring reassurances. "It's what Elena would have wanted," he said loud enough for me to hear. I nearly laughed in the darkness. The audacity was breathtaking. While they continued rehearsing, I received a text from my contact. Everything was in position. Accounts flagged. Evidence loaded and ready. I sent a single message to Garrett. Marcus, former best friend, who had eventually chosen to help me after learning the full truth. He would create a distraction during the rehearsal if needed. As the rehearsal wound down, I made my move. I slipped down the back stairs while Claire was momentarily alone in the front pew. I stayed in the shadows of the large stone pillars, my voice echoing softly when I finally spoke. Having second thoughts, sister? Claire whirled around, her face draining of color. Who's there? She whispered, voice trembling. I stepped just far enough into the light for her to see my face, but not clearly enough for others to notice. Her eyes widened in pure terror. Alina, that's impossible. You're dead. Am I? I replied calmly. Like it was impossible for you to sleep with my husband? To help plan my accident? To wear my grandmother's dress while carrying his child? She stumbled backward, hands flying to her stomach. Please, I'm sorry. We can fix this. I took one slow step closer, keeping my voice low and steady. There is no fixing this, Claire. But I promise you one thing. Tomorrow, you will have the wedding day you truly deserve. I melted back into the shadows just as my mother returned with a glass of water. Claire was hyperventilating, sobbing about seeing a ghost. My mother tried to calm her, but I could see her own hands shaking. From the loft, Sophia and I watched them leave. Claire was nearly hysterical. Marcus looked pale and on edge. My phone buzzed, the final confirmation. All financial accounts were now being monitored. The trap was fully set. That night, back in the quiet motel, I sat with the original sapphire ring from my grandmother on my finger. I thought about the woman I used to be. Trusting, forgiving, always keeping the peace. She was gone. In her place was someone who understood that sometimes justice requires perfect timing and ice-cold calm. Tomorrow, they would stand at the altar expecting their happy ending. Instead, they would get the truth. And I would finally be free. The church bells rang at noon, clear and bright, as if celebrating something beautiful. Instead, they were announcing the beginning of the end. I waited in the shadows behind the massive church organ, heart steady, breathing calm. The guests had filled the pews. Whispers about the bride's nervousness floated through the air. Marcus stood at the altar, looking slightly pale but handsome in his tailored suit. Claire began her walk down the aisle in a backup dress, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. She looked terrified, eyes darting around as if expecting ghosts in every corner. The priest began the ceremony with warm words about love and commitment. I waited for the perfect moment. Then it came. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, the priest intoned, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The silence stretched. I stepped out from behind the organ. My heels clicked deliberately on the marble floor as I walked slowly down the center aisle. Every head turned. A collective gasp rippled through the church like a wave. Marcus stumbled backward, face ashen. Claire dropped her bouquet, flowers scattering across the floor like broken dreams. Hello, everyone, I said. My voice clear, calm, and carrying easily through the stunned silence. I apologize for being late. Traffic from the afterlife was heavier than expected. Whispers exploded into chaos. This isn't possible, Marcus stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. You're dead. We made sure. He caught himself too late. The words hung in the air, damning him in front of everyone. I continued walking until I stood just a few feet from them. You made sure? I asked quietly, raising an eyebrow. Like you made sure the trail was slick after the rain? Like you made sure I went alone? Like you made sure my signature was forged on the insurance documents? Claire sank to her knees, mascara already running. Alina, please not here. Why not here? I replied, voice still calm but carrying steel. This is the church where we celebrated holidays together. This is the community that mourned me. This is the perfect place for the truth. I gestured around at the extravagant flowers, the guests, the ceremony paid for with my death benefit. You used my money for all of this. My life insurance, my inheritance, my future. As if on cue, the side doors opened. Two FBI agents and local detectives entered, moving with purpose. Speaking of money, I continued, turning to address the guests directly. Marcus, would you like to explain to everyone how you've been spending the proceeds from my life insurance? Or should we let the Financial Crimes Unit show the recovered text messages and bank records? Panic flashed across Marcus's face. He tried to bolt towards a side exit, but the agents were faster. They tackled him cleanly, cuffing him as he struggled and cursed. Claire was sobbing uncontrollably now. My mother had gone deathly pale in the front pew. I nodded toward the choir loft. The large screen meant for romantic photos flickered to life. Instead of smiling couple pictures, giant text appeared. Their own recovered messages. The trail should be slick enough after the rain. Make sure she goes alone. This is the only way we can be together. Gasps and shouts of outrage filled the church. I turned to Claire. You planned my death while carrying his child. You wore my grandmother's dress while celebrating what you stole from me. My mother stood up, voice trembling. Elena, that's enough. Enough? I replied, looking at her with quiet disappointment. Like forging grandmother's trust was enough? Like sell my belongings while I was fighting to survive was enough? Two officers moved toward her. She collapsed back into the pew. The scene was complete chaos, but I felt only calm clarity. I addressed the guests one final time. I didn't come here for revenge. I came here for truth. They didn't just betray me, they tried to erase me. Today, that ends. As Marcus and Claire were led away in handcuffs, one cursing, the other sobbing, I stood in the center aisle, finally at peace. The perfect wedding they planned with my money had become their worst nightmare. And I was still standing. The months that followed the wedding were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and quiet healing. The case against Marcus and Claire moved quickly, thanks to the overwhelming evidence we had gathered. Financial records, recovered messages, forged documents, and even testimony from Garrett and my mother sealed their fate. The trial was public and painful, but I sat through every session with calm dignity. I didn't need to speak much. The facts spoke for themselves. Marcus tried to blame everything on Claire during the trial. He painted himself as a weak man led astray. Claire, in turn, claimed she was manipulated and afraid. The jury saw through both performances. They were each sentenced to 15 years in prison. Full restitution was ordered. The life insurance money, the assets they had purchased, and the inheritance they tried to steal were all returned to me, with interest and penalties. My mother received supervised probation and house arrest due to her age and cooperation, but she lost the family home and most of her savings. On the day they were formally sentenced, I stood across the street from the courthouse with Sophia and Ruth, who had traveled to be with me. We watched as Marcus and Claire were led out in handcuffs. Claire's pregnancy was visible under the prison uniform. The sight stirred complicated emotions in me. Sadness for the innocent child, but also relief that the cycle of lies would not continue unchecked. Sophia squeezed my hand. You did it, Elena. You got your life back. I smiled softly. I got more than that. I got the truth. The media called it one of the most dramatic cases of insurance fraud and conspiracy they had ever covered. My story spread far beyond Asheville. Messages poured in from women all over the world who had experienced their own versions of betrayal. I read many of them late at night, feeling both humbled and strengthened. Ruth decided to stay with me for a while after the trial. Her quiet wisdom became an anchor during those turbulent weeks. One evening on the porch of my restored home, she said, "You faced darkness most people never encounter, and you came through it with your soul intact. That's real strength." I sold the big house Marcus and I had shared. Too many ghosts. Instead, I bought a smaller, brighter home with a garden where I could plant new memories. I returned to photography slowly, starting with personal projects that captured resilience and quiet beauty. The sapphire ring from my grandmother stayed on my finger, not as a reminder of loss, but as a symbol of endurance. There were still hard days. Nights when the weight of everything I had lost pressed heavily on my chest. But those days grew fewer and farther between. I began hiking again. Shorter trails at first, then gradually longer ones. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I visited Ruth's cabin often. It had become a sacred place of survival and rebirth. We would sit by the wood stove, drinking tea, talking about life, loss, and the unexpected gifts that sometimes come from our greatest pain. Marcus and Claire both reached out through letters from prison, apologies, excuses, requests for forgiveness. I read them once, then placed them in a box I rarely opened again. Some things cannot be forgiven, not yet, maybe not ever, and that was okay. My healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let it define my future. I was no longer the woman they tried to bury. I was the woman who rose. The last chapter of this story isn't about justice served. It's about what came after. 6 months after the sentencing, I stood on a windy cliff in Iceland, the place I had always dreamed of visiting, but kept postponing for someday. The northern lights danced above me in shades of green and purple. For the first time in over a year, I felt truly light. I had reclaimed my name, my money, and my freedom, but more importantly, I had reclaimed myself. Photography became my therapy. I traveled to places that healed me. Mountains, oceans, quiet forests. My lens now captured not just beautiful moments, but stories of resilience. Women who had survived betrayal. People who had rebuilt after loss. I turned my pain into something that could help others feel less alone. Sophia and I grew even closer. Ruth became like a second mother to me. We created a small support circle for women who had experienced deep family betrayal. The work felt meaningful in ways success and money never could. I learned to trust again, slowly, carefully, and on my own terms. I dated when I felt ready, but I no longer ignored red flags for the sake of peace. I protected my peace fiercely. Looking back, I realized the mountain didn't just take me. It gave me something precious. Clarity. It stripped away every illusion I had about love, family, and loyalty. What remained was truth. If you're watching this and carrying your own heavy story of betrayal, I want you to hear me clearly. Your worth was never dependent on their love. Your voice matters even when they tried to silence it. And your life is yours to rebuild. More beautiful, more honest, and more powerful than before. You don't have to burn their world down to rise. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to stay buried. I still wear my grandmother's sapphire ring, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as proof of what survived. I am no longer Elena Voss, the woman they tried to erase. I am Elena Voss, the woman who returned stronger, wiser, and finally free. Thank you for walking through this story with me. If it touched something in your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear they are not alone. Type reborn in the comments if you're choosing yourself today. Your story isn't over either. Keep going. The best chapters are still ahead.